Hey Reddit, throwaway account here because this is way too raw and embarrassing to put on my main. I need to get this off my chest, and honestly, I'm not sure where else to go with this. I'm a 32M, recently married to my wife, Allison, 29F. We've been together for 3 years, and I thought I knew her better than anyone. Turns out, I didn't know her at all. We just got back from our honeymoon, a 2-week cruise through the Caribbean. This trip was supposed to be the perfect start to our married life, but it ended up being, well, I don't even know what to call it. A nightmare? A sick joke? All I know is, I'm sitting here wondering how the hell I didn't see the signs sooner. The first few days were everything I imagined. We were one of those annoyingly happy couples, doing all the cliché honeymoon things, holding hands on deck, eating overpriced meals, laughing like life couldn't get any better. But now, looking back, there were little things I ignored. For example, Allison seemed overly chatty with the staff. I mean, she's always been friendly, so I didn't think much of it. But on the second day, I noticed she'd linger after conversations with them, like she was waiting for something. I brushed it off. She was just being her usual outgoing self, right? Fast forward to the third night. We just finished a fancy dinner and were at one of the lounges, listening to a live jazz band. It was one of those moments where I thought, man, I'm lucky to have her. Then, out of nowhere, she tells me she has a headache and needs to head back to the cabin. I offered to go with her, but she insisted I stay. You've been looking forward to this band all day, she said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. I'll just rest for a bit and see if I feel better. I didn't think much of it at the time. Why would I? We're newlyweds, and she'd never given me a reason not to trust her. So, I stayed and chatted with some other couples. I even had a fun conversation with this older pair celebrating their 40th anniversary. They were giving me marriage advice, and I remember feeling so smug, like, yeah, I've got this figured out already. When the band wrapped up for the night, I decided to head back to the cabin. That's when things started feeling off. As I approached the door, I saw a staff member, a room cleaner, leaving in a hurry. He looked flustered, like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. He mumbled an apology and avoided eye contact as we passed. I figured maybe he forgot to finish something earlier and was embarrassed about coming back so late. When I walked in, Allison was sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. She looked up and smiled. You're back early, she said, her tone casual. Too casual. The band finished up, I replied, shrugging off my jacket. Feeling better? Much, she said a little too quickly. I just needed to lie down for a bit. The headache's gone now. Here's the thing, her hair was damp. And no, she hadn't mentioned taking a shower. The room also smelled faintly of cologne, not the one I wear. I ignored the sinking feeling in my gut. Must be my imagination, I thought. She's my wife. Don't be that guy. But that night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't shake the image of the cleaner's flushed face or the strange vibe in the room. Allison fell asleep quickly, but I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling. Something felt wrong. I didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning of the end. After that strange night, I couldn't shake the image of the room cleaner's flushed face or how rushed he seemed as he left our cabin. I told myself I was overthinking it. Paranoia doesn't look good on anyone, let alone a newlywed. Still, something felt off. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to surprise Allison with breakfast in bed. She loves those little gestures, and I figured it might make up for her cutting the night short. The buffet was already bustling with sleepy passengers shuffling around in their robes. I grabbed a tray loaded with her favorites, fruit, croissants, and coffee, and headed back to our room. When I got there, she was in the shower. Nothing weird about that, but the second I opened the door, I smelled it again, that faint cologne. Not mine, and definitely not hers. Allison? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Morning! She shouted back over the sound of the water. You're up early! Her tone was bright, but there was something rehearsed about it. I set the tray down on the small table by the window and looked around. The cabin was clean, too clean. Like someone had wiped away evidence of, what? Shaking my head, I sat down and waited for her to finish. You're being ridiculous, I told myself. Stop reading into things that aren't there. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel with her hair dripping, she gave me this warm, sleepy smile. You brought me breakfast? Of course, I said, forcing a grin. She kissed my cheek and sat down to eat, chatting about the day's itinerary. I wanted to enjoy the moment, but my brain wouldn't shut up. That smell. The cleaner. Her damp hair last night. I brushed it off again, determined to focus on us. But then, later that afternoon, something else happened. We were lounging by the pool, soaking in the sun, when Allison said she was going to grab us some drinks. She kissed me on the forehead and headed off toward the bar. I watched her for a bit, admiring the way her sundress flowed in the breeze, before turning my attention to the book I'd brought. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. I glanced toward the bar, expecting to see her chatting with one of the bartenders. But she wasn't there. Maybe there's a line, I thought, trying to ignore the tiny knot forming in my stomach. Another 10 minutes went by. I stood up, scanning the deck. Still no sign of her. Just as I was about to go looking, she appeared out of nowhere, holding 2 fruity cocktails. Sorry, she said breathlessly, handing me mine. The bar was packed. I smiled and thanked her, but something wasn't right. Her face was flushed, and she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. You okay? I asked. Yeah, of course, she said quickly. Why? I shrugged. You were gone a while. She waved me off. Like I said, the line was insane. Her explanation seemed logical, but it didn't sit right. I glanced down at the cocktail she handed me, barely any condensation on the glass. It hadn't been sitting long. As we clinked glasses and sipped our drinks, she leaned back in her chair, looking as relaxed as ever. But my mind wouldn't stop racing. That night, I decided to test something. Allison, let's do one of the couple's activities tomorrow, I said as we got ready for bed. Maybe the wine tasting or the trivia game. Her expression shifted just slightly, like she was calculating something. Actually, she said, pulling on her pajamas, I was thinking of going to the spa in the morning. You should go to the trivia thing though. I know you love that kind of stuff. I forced a laugh. Are you sure? I thought we'd do more things together. We will, she said, climbing into bed and kissing my shoulder. Just not everything. It's good to have our own space too, right? Right, I said, though it didn't feel right at all. As I lay there, listening to her breathing even out as she fell asleep, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of honeymoon this was turning into. To understand why this is hitting me so hard, I need to give you guys some background on our relationship. Allison and I met 3 years ago at a mutual friend's housewarming party. She was the life of the party, charming everyone in the room with her quick wit and contagious laugh. I was standing awkwardly by the snack table, stuffing my face with mini spring rolls and wondering how soon I could leave without seeming rude. She approached me first, completely caught me off guard. You're the only one here not pretending to like craft beer, she said, motioning to the bottle of water in my hand. I respect that. That's how it started. We talked for hours that night, and by the end of the evening, I knew I wanted to see her again. Fast forward a year, and we were inseparable. She moved into my place, and I proposed a year after that. Everything felt easy with Allison. I'll be honest, I've always been more introverted, the kind of guy who prefers quiet nights at home over big social events. Allison was the opposite. She thrived on energy, loved meeting new people, and had this effortless charm that made everyone gravitate toward her. At first, I thought our differences balanced us out. She pulled me out of my shell, and I grounded her when life got hectic. But there were cracks, even before the wedding. One time, about 6 months before we got engaged, she went out with her friends for a girls' night. She came home around 2 a.m., visibly tipsy but in good spirits. I didn't think much of it until I noticed she'd left her phone on the couch, unlocked. A message popped up from a guy I didn't recognize. Hope you got home safe. Great seeing you tonight. I confronted her about it the next morning, and she laughed it off. Oh, that's Jake. He's just a friend of Mia's boyfriend. He was at the bar with us, no big deal. Her explanation seemed reasonable, but something about the way she brushed it off so casually bothered me. Still, I let it go. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid boyfriend who reads too much into things. Then, there was the time she forgot to tell me she had lunch with her ex. I only found out because I spotted a photo of them together on her friend's Instagram story. When I asked her about it, she apologized and said it had been a last-minute thing. We're just friends, she assured me. It didn't seem like a big deal. Looking back, maybe those were red flags. But I wanted to believe the best in her. She was my person, the woman I wanted to spend my life with. So, I let those moments slide. Now, sitting here on this honeymoon, those memories are clawing their way back. The way she's been acting lately feels eerily similar, like she's hiding something and hoping I won't notice. The thing is, I can't just shrug it off anymore. This isn't dating. This is marriage. And something about her sudden need for space on a trip that's supposed to be about us has me questioning everything. By the 5th night of the cruise, the unease was eating me alive. I'd spent the entire day trying to push down this gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. Allison had spent most of the morning at the spa, alone, and when she came back, she barely talked about it. Normally, she'd go on and on about the massage or the facial or whatever, but this time, she just said it was fine, and left it at that. It was like she was walking on eggshells around me, trying to act normal but overcompensating in ways that made it worse. That evening, she suggested we go to one of the ship's clubs. It's theme night, she said with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. Come on, let's dance. I agreed because, honestly, I wanted to keep an eye on her. Maybe that sounds controlling, but at this point, I was too unsettled to just let things go. The club was packed, pulsating with neon lights and the bass-heavy beats of a DJ remixing top 40 hits. Allison seemed completely in her element, swaying to the music with a drink in hand. I tried to relax, telling myself this was normal, that I was imagining things. And then it happened. I'd gone to the bar to grab us another round of drinks. When I turned back to where we'd been standing, she was gone. My eyes scanned the crowd, heart racing. She couldn't have gone far, right? But she had. I spotted her across the room, near the back wall where the light barely reached. She was talking to someone, a man. He wasn't wearing a staff uniform, so he wasn't part of the ship's crew. He was tall, tan, and leaning in close, too close. Allison was laughing at something he said, her hand brushing her hair back in that way she always did when she was flirting. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't just stand there like an idiot. I pushed my way through the crowd, gripping the drinks tighter than I probably should have. By the time I reached them, she'd already noticed me coming. Hey, there you are, she said, her voice a little too bright. I was just telling this guy about our honeymoon. The man turned to face me, his smile easy but his eyes sharp, like he was sizing me up. You must be the lucky groom, he said, holding out a hand. I shook it out of reflex, barely registering his name when he introduced himself. I couldn't even tell you what he said. My brain was too busy screaming at me to pay attention to the way Allison shifted uncomfortably, like she didn't want me there. We were just talking about the next port, she added quickly, as if that explained anything. Yeah, the guy said smoothly, his gaze lingering on her just a second too long. Your wife mentioned you guys might skip the snorkeling excursion. If you do, you should check out the private beaches. Much quieter. I forced a smile, but inside, I was boiling. Who the hell was this guy, and why did he know our plans? We'll see, I said, my voice tight. There was an awkward pause before Allison grabbed my arm. Let's get back to dancing, she said, steering me away. We didn't talk about it, not then. She acted like nothing was wrong, pulling me onto the dance floor and throwing her arms around my neck like she hadn't just been caught whispering with some random guy. But I couldn't shake the tension in her shoulders or the way her laugh sounded forced. That night, after she fell asleep, I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. Who was he? A fellow passenger? Someone she'd met earlier? And why did she seem so nervous around him? At around 2 a.m., I got up and stepped out onto the balcony, the sea air doing little to calm me down. That's when I noticed something strange on the small table by the door, her phone. Normally, she kept it on her side of the bed, plugged in. It buzzed just as I picked it up. Unknown number, you had a great time tonight. But what about us? My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. But what about us? What the hell was that supposed to mean? For a second, I thought about waking Allison up right then and there. I wanted to demand answers, to shake her and ask her who this unknown number belonged to and why they were texting her in the middle of the night. But I didn't. Instead, I did something I'd never done before in our entire relationship. I unlocked her phone. We'd exchanged passcodes ages ago, back when things were good, but I'd never actually used hers. I'd never needed to. I always trusted her. Not anymore. As I scrolled through her messages, my stomach churned. Most of her texts were innocent enough, chats with friends, some group message about bridesmaid drama that I vaguely remembered hearing about before the wedding. But then, there were the ones she'd deleted. She must have forgotten to clear the recently deleted folder. There were 6 messages in there, all from the same unknown number. The texts weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. They were short, vague, and just suspicious enough to make my skin crawl. Can't wait to see you again. That dress tonight, wow. Same time tomorrow? I put the phone down, my hand shaking. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Who was this person? Was it the guy from the club? Someone from the crew? I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself there had to be some kind of explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, or a joke, or something. Anything but what it seemed like. I sat on the balcony for what felt like hours, watching the moonlight dance on the water. I kept hoping I'd wake up and realize this was all some twisted nightmare. But it wasn't. By the time I crawled back into bed, Allison was still fast asleep, her breathing soft and steady. I stared at her in the dim light, trying to reconcile the woman lying next to me with the one who was hiding texts from an unknown number. The next morning, she acted like everything was fine. Want to grab breakfast before we dock? She asked, tying her hair up into a messy bun. I couldn't bring myself to look her in the eye. Yeah, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sure. We ate on the top deck, the salty breeze mingling with the smell of freshly baked pastries. Allison chatted away about the excursion options for the day, asking if I wanted to rent bikes or try paddle boarding. I nodded along, barely registering her words. My mind was stuck on those texts. At one point, she reached across the table and touched my hand. You okay? You seem quiet. I'm fine, I lied. She gave me a small, concerned smile, like she didn't believe me, but she didn't push. When we got off the ship to explore the island, she seemed completely at ease, snapping photos and dragging me into shops to look at souvenirs. I went along with it, but inside, I was unraveling. Every time she checked her phone, my stomach twisted. Every time she smiled at a stranger, my mind spiraled into dark places. It wasn't until later that afternoon, when we were back on the ship, that I saw it again, the man from the club. He was sitting at the poolside bar, sipping a drink and chatting with one of the bartenders. I wouldn't have noticed him if he hadn't turned his head just as we walked by. Our eyes met for a brief second, and something in his expression shifted. He looked smug, like he knew something I didn't. Allison, I said, stopping in my tracks. Isn't that the guy from last night? She glanced over, her expression unreadable. Oh. Yeah, I guess so, she said casually. You guess so? I pressed. She shrugged, pulling me away. Come on, let's grab a drink. But her grip on my arm was a little too firm, her smile a little too forced. I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. That smug half-smile wasn't the kind of expression you give to a stranger on vacation. No, that was the look of someone who wanted me to know he had the upper hand. Allison, on the other hand, was doing everything she could to act like nothing was out of the ordinary. She chatted about dinner plans, laughed at some lame joke I made, and ordered us drinks by the pool. But her act was cracking. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her eyes darting toward the bar where he was sitting. She'd catch herself and quickly look away, like she didn't want me to notice. But I noticed. Do you know that guy? I asked casually, pretending to sip my cocktail. Her laugh came too quickly. No, of course not. Why would I? I don't know, I said, leaning back in my chair. Just seems like he knows you. The way he looked at you last night, and again just now. She froze for the briefest moment before forcing a smile. You're imagining things. Am I? Yes, she said, her tone sharper than I expected. Look, it's a crowded ship. People bump into each other all the time. You're making it into something it's not. Her defensiveness caught me off guard. Allison was usually easygoing, not one to snap over harmless questions. But now she seemed tense, like she was trying to steer the conversation away before I pushed too far. For the rest of the afternoon, she did everything she could to distract me, dragging me to a comedy show, suggesting we book a massage, even convincing me to join her in a round of mini-golf, which she knows I hate. But I couldn't let it go. Later that evening, while she was getting ready for dinner, I made up an excuse to head out early. I'm going to grab a drink at the bar, I said, slipping on my shoes. She didn't look up from her makeup bag. Okay, I'll meet you there. But I didn't go to the bar. Instead, I went looking for him. It didn't take long to find him. He was in the same spot as earlier, nursing another drink and chatting with someone new. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked right up to him and stood there until he noticed me. Hey, I said, my voice calm but firm. He glanced up, his expression shifting from surprise to amusement. Can I help you? Yeah, I said, crossing my arms. You were talking to my wife last night. Allison. At the club. His smile widened. Oh, that's your wife? Small world. The way he said it made my skin crawl. What do you want with her? I asked, cutting straight to the point. He raised his hands in mock surrender. Relax, man. We were just chatting. She seemed cool, that's all. Cool? I repeated, my voice dripping with skepticism. Yeah, he said, leaning back in his chair. She mentioned it was your honeymoon. Congrats, by the way. You're a lucky guy. There it was again, that smug tone, like he was enjoying some private joke at my expense. I stared him down, my fists clenching at my sides. Stay away from her, I said finally, my voice low and steady. He smirked, taking a slow sip of his drink. Sure thing. I walked away before I could do something stupid, like throw a punch that would get me thrown off the ship. But his words and that smug look on his face stayed with me, eating away at my thoughts like acid. When I got back to the cabin, Allison was waiting for me, dressed in a sleek black dress and looking as gorgeous as ever. You okay? She asked, her voice soft. I wanted to tell her what had just happened, to demand answers. But something held me back. Yeah, I lied, forcing a smile. I'm fine. But I wasn't fine. Not even close. Dinner that night was unbearable. Allison was radiant as always, laughing and making small talk, but I couldn't shake the tension building in my chest. Every time she spoke, all I could think about was him. The way he smiled when I mentioned her. The way she avoided eye contact when I asked if she knew him. Earth to you, Allison said, snapping her fingers in front of my face. What's going on with you tonight? You've been weird all day. I hesitated, swirling the wine in my glass. This was my chance. I could bring up everything, the guy from the bar, the strange texts, her defensiveness. But as she looked at me with those wide, innocent eyes, my courage faltered. Nothing, I said finally. Just tired. Her smile softened. Well, I'm glad we're here. This trip has been amazing so far, don't you think? I nodded, forcing a tight smile. Yeah. Amazing. But my mind was racing. The texts. The deleted messages. That smug look on his face. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them over a candlelit dinner. Later that night, after Allison fell asleep, I made my move. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, grabbing her phone from the nightstand. My hands shook as I unlocked it and navigated to her messages. The deleted folder was empty now. She must have realized I'd been poking around. But people always leave breadcrumbs, don't they? I checked her call history next. Nothing unusual, just a handful of recent calls to her best friend, Megan, and her mom. But then I remembered something. WhatsApp. Sure enough, when I opened the app, there was a chat with no name. Just a phone number and a single message. Same plan tomorrow? I felt sick. Whoever this person was, they were careful. No saved name, no detailed conversations, just quick, cryptic messages. But I wasn't about to give up. I copied the number into my own phone and pulled up a reverse lookup site. It took a few minutes to load, but when the result popped up, my blood ran cold. The number was registered to a man named Daniel Perez. I didn't recognize the name, but I didn't need to. The image on the profile was unmistakable. It was him. The guy from the bar. I stared at the screen, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a coincidence. Allison knew him. She had to know him. The next morning, I woke up early, barely able to look at her as we got ready for the day. You're up before me for once, she said with a laugh, stretching. I grunted in response, avoiding her gaze. We had a snorkeling excursion planned that day, and as we boarded the smaller boat that would take us out to the reef, I felt like I was watching everything from a distance. Allison was chatting with the other passengers, laughing and smiling like nothing was wrong. But I couldn't unsee what I'd found. As the boat pulled away from the dock, I spotted him. Daniel. He was standing on the upper deck of the cruise ship, leaning casually against the railing and watching us leave. And though I was far away, I swear I could see that damn smug smile on his face. The snorkeling trip was supposed to be fun, but I could barely focus. While everyone else marveled at the colorful fish and coral reefs, I felt like I was drowning in my own thoughts. Allison seemed perfectly at ease, diving into the water with the kind of enthusiasm that had once made me fall for her. She looked back at me a few times, her smile wide and genuine, but I couldn't return it. All I could see was Daniel, standing on the upper deck, watching us leave. Why was he always lurking nearby? Why was she pretending he didn't exist? When we got back to the ship that afternoon, I was on edge. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, half expecting him to appear out of nowhere again. But it wasn't Daniel who caught my attention this time, it was Allison. After we got to our cabin, she made an excuse about needing to grab something from the ship's gift shop. I forgot to get sunscreen, she said, slipping on her sandals. I'll be back in a bit. I'll come with you, I offered, more to keep an eye on her than anything else. She hesitated, just for a second, before shaking her head. No, you should relax. You look like you could use a nap. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I nodded reluctantly, but as soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my shoes and followed. The ship's corridors were crowded, passengers shuffling to and from activities, but I managed to keep her in sight. She wasn't heading toward the gift shop. Instead, she was making her way to the elevators. My stomach churned as I watched her step inside and press a button. I couldn't see which floor she'd chosen, but I had a pretty good idea. I took the stairs, my heart pounding with every step. When I reached the floor where I suspected she'd gone, I scanned the hallway. And there she was, standing near one of the private lounges, glancing around nervously like she was waiting for someone. For him. I ducked behind a corner, my breath shallow as I peeked around the edge. Sure enough, Daniel appeared a few moments later, striding confidently toward her. Allison, he said, his voice low but warm. What are you doing here? She hissed, her tone sharp but quiet. He smirked. Relax. I just wanted to see you. She glanced around again, her hands fidgeting at her sides. You can't just, we talked about this. You're going to get us caught. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Us? I thought. Daniel leaned in closer, his voice dropping even lower. Don't worry, no one's paying attention. I just wanted to remind you about tonight. Daniel, stop, she said, her voice more forceful this time. We can't keep doing this. Not here. Then meet me later, he replied, that infuriating smirk still plastered on his face. Same place as last time. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward, ready to confront them, but just as I opened my mouth, a group of loud passengers turned the corner. Allison and Daniel sprang apart, both of them trying to look casual as the group passed by. Allison? One of the passengers called out. It was a woman we'd met at the pool earlier in the week. Hey, there you are! Are you coming to trivia tonight? Allison's face lit up with relief. Oh. Hi, yeah, maybe. I was just. She trailed off, glancing at Daniel. He gave her a subtle nod and walked away, disappearing down the hall before I could stop him. I stood frozen, my fists clenched as Allison chatted with the woman like nothing had happened. When she finally returned to the cabin later, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to decide how to confront her. She walked in, carrying a small bottle of sunscreen, and gave me that same practiced smile. Got what I needed, she said, holding up the bottle. I stared at her, my chest tight with anger and betrayal. Where were you? I asked, my voice steady but cold. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. At the gift shop, like I said. Why? I didn't believe her. Not for a second. But I wasn't ready to let her know what I'd seen, not yet. Just wondering, I said, standing up and walking past her. I need some air. After the encounter in the hallway, I felt like I was living in some surreal nightmare. My wife was lying to me. I didn't know the full extent of it yet, but I could feel the truth inching closer. What I didn't expect was how quickly it would start unraveling. The next morning, we were back in the ship's main dining room for breakfast. I could barely eat, pushing scrambled eggs around my plate, while Allison chatted on and on about our plans for the day. Every word out of her mouth felt like nails scraping across my brain. I excused myself halfway through the meal, saying I needed to stretch my legs. Allison waved me off with a bright, "Meet you by the pool later," as though nothing was wrong. Wandering the ship aimlessly, I ended up in the small cafe by the atrium, trying to clear my head with a cup of coffee. That's when I saw her, the woman from the pool. I couldn't remember her name, but I recognized her immediately. She was sitting a few tables away, flipping through a guidebook and sipping something frothy. She spotted me at the same time, waving enthusiastically. "Hey, Allison's husband, right?" she called out. I hesitated before walking over, trying to muster a smile. "That's me," I said, sitting across from her. "I'm Sophie," she said, holding out her hand. "We met at the pool the other day." "Trivia night?" "Right, trivia," I said, shaking her hand. Her smile faltered slightly as she leaned in conspiratorially. "So, weird question. Is Allison okay?" I stiffened. "Why do you ask?" Sophie glanced around like she was worried someone might overhear. "Well, I saw her at the steakhouse last night. I thought she was with you at first, but then I realized the guy she was sitting with wasn't you." My chest tightened, but I kept my face neutral. "Oh, that was probably her brother," I said quickly, forcing a laugh. Sophie tilted her head, frowning slightly. "Her brother? She told me earlier this week she was an only child." "Damn it. She's technically my stepsister," I lied, leaning into the story. "We're super close, so we just say brother and sister. Less complicated that way." Sophie's eyes narrowed slightly, like she wasn't sure whether to believe me. "Huh. Funny, because when I asked her if that guy was you, she said he was her brother." I forced another laugh, though my insides were twisting into knots. That's what I mean. She probably meant me. It's an inside joke between us. Sophie gave me a long, searching look before nodding slowly. I guess that makes sense. She sipped her drink thoughtfully, then added, Well, either way, you're lucky to have her. She's such a sweetheart. Yeah, I said, my voice tight. Lucky. The conversation ended soon after that, but as I walked away, my mind was racing. Allison had told Sophie that Daniel was her brother? Why would she even bother lying about something like that unless there was something to hide? I needed answers. That afternoon, when we were lounging by the pool, I brought it up casually. So, I said, keeping my tone light, did you run into anyone you knew last night? Allison frowned, adjusting her sunglasses. What do you mean? At dinner, I said, watching her closely. I thought I saw Sophie from the pool near the steakhouse. Her body tensed ever so slightly. Oh, yeah, she said after a pause. She waved at me while I was leaving. I don't think she recognized me, though. The lie was so smooth, so effortless, that for a moment, I almost doubted myself. Almost. But then Sophie walked by. She didn't even notice us at first, her focus on the book she was holding, but I couldn't help myself. Hey, Sophie! I called out. She stopped, smiling when she saw us. Oh, hi! Allison froze beside me, her smile rigid as Sophie approached. Small world, huh? Sophie said, glancing between the two of us. I was just telling your husband about running into you last night at the steakhouse. The color drained from Allison's face, but she recovered quickly, laughing nervously. Oh, yeah, that? What a coincidence, right? Totally, Sophie said, oblivious to the tension. I thought for sure you'd be eating with him, but your brother seemed nice too. My heart pounded as Allison's eyes darted toward me, panic flickering across her face. Oh, yeah, she stammered. He just happened to be there. I hadn't seen him in forever, so we caught up over dinner. Wow, small world, Sophie said again, smiling. I nodded, pretending to laugh. Crazy small. As Sophie waved goodbye and walked off, Allison turned to me, her smile brittle. Want another drink? She asked, her voice a little too bright. No, I said, leaning in closer. Tell me more about your brother. I couldn't wait any longer. Allison's lies were piling up so fast, they were practically suffocating me. The fake brother, the deleted messages, the way she'd been sneaking around the ship. It was all too much. I didn't want to play dumb anymore, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let her keep dragging me through this circus. After Sophie left, I sat there in silence, staring at Allison. She adjusted her sunglasses nervously, pretending to focus on the pool, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She knew. Let's go back to the cabin, I said finally, my voice cold. Allison hesitated. Now? But I thought we were going to. No, I said firmly, cutting her off. She didn't argue. She just grabbed her bag and followed me, her pace slower than usual, like she was trying to delay the inevitable. The walk back to the cabin felt endless. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, my mind a whirlwind of questions and accusations. I wasn't even sure what I was going to say, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done with the lies. The second the door shut behind us, I turned to face her. Who the hell is Daniel? I demanded. Her face went pale, her eyes widening in shock. What? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't, I snapped, my voice rising. Don't even try to lie to me right now. I know who he is. I've seen you with him. I've seen the texts, Allison. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For a moment, she looked like she might try to deny it again, but then she slumped against the wall, her hands trembling. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, fine. I know Daniel. But it's not what you think. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. Not what I think? Really? Then explain to me why you've been sneaking around with him, deleting messages, and telling people he's your brother. Go ahead, Allison, make it make sense. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Didn't mean for what to happen? I demanded, stepping closer. Her shoulders shook as she started to cry, and for a brief second, I felt a flicker of guilt. But then I remembered the smirk on Daniel's face, the way she'd lied to my face over and over again, and that guilt evaporated. Tell me the truth, I said, my voice hard. All of it. Now. She looked up at me, her mascara smudged and her eyes red. We met on the first day of the cruise, she said slowly. He works for the ship, he's part of the entertainment staff. I didn't plan on anything happening. We just started talking and then. And then what? I spat. And then it got out of hand, she admitted, her voice breaking. I was bored, okay. You've been so distant this whole trip, and I just. You just what? Thought it'd be fun to hook up with some random guy while I was sitting here thinking we were starting our lives together? Her silence was deafening. I shook my head, the weight of her betrayal settling over me like a heavy fog. How long? I asked quietly. What? She whispered. How long have you been sneaking off with him? Was it just this trip, or has this been going on longer? It's only been this trip, she said quickly, her voice desperate. I swear, it was just a stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything. I laughed again, this time softer, almost to myself. Didn't mean anything? You've been lying to me since the second we got on this ship. It sure as hell seems like it meant something to you. Alan, please, she said, reaching for my hand. I love you. I made a mistake, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. We can work through this. I yanked my hand away before she could touch me. Don't you dare try to spin this into something we can fix. You don't love me, Allison. If you did, you wouldn't have done this. Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I married, was gone. And all I could see now was a liar. I need some air, I said, my voice shaking. Alan, wait. But I didn't wait. I walked out of the cabin, slamming the door behind me and leaving her cries echoing in the silence. I stormed out of the cabin, my mind racing. I felt betrayed, furious, and honestly, humiliated. But beneath all that, a darker thought began to creep in. She doesn't deserve to walk away from this clean. This wasn't just some fling or one-off mistake. Allison had spent our honeymoon sneaking around with some ship staffer, lying to my face, and pretending like everything was fine. And now? She wanted to fix things, to work through it. As though we could just patch this up with an apology and move on. Not a chance. By the time I reached the ship's observation deck, I'd made up my mind. If she was going to treat me like a fool, I was going to make sure she felt the consequences. And lucky for me, this cruise had a little quirk that worked in my favor. See, this wasn't just any ordinary cruise, it was one of those premium experiences, where passengers could extend their trip week by week if they wanted. Every 7 days you had to decide whether to pay for another week or disembark at the next port. And here's the kicker, all on-board charges, rooms, food, drinks, were tied to one primary account. My account. I leaned against the railing, staring out at the endless expanse of ocean as a plan began to form. It was petty, sure. But it was also the kind of justice that felt right. When I returned to the cabin later that evening, Allison was sitting on the bed, her eyes puffy from crying. She looked up as I walked in, her face a mix of guilt and hope. Alan, she said softly, standing up. I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you, but I want to make this right. Please, can we just talk? I held up a hand, cutting her off. I've thought about it, I said evenly. And you're right. We need to handle this like adults. Her face lit up with relief. Thank you. I know I don't deserve it, but... Let me finish, I said sharply, and she froze. You're staying here. What? She asked, her brow furrowing. You heard me. You're staying here, and I'm leaving. She blinked, confused. But the cruise ends tomorrow. We'll leave together. No, Allison, I said, smirking for the first time in what felt like days. I'm leaving the ship tomorrow. You're on your own. Since you've been enjoying your little private adventures so much, you can stay another week. Alan, what are you talking about? She asked, her voice rising. I can't stay another week. We didn't budget for that. Oh, don't worry about the budget, I said, pulling out my wallet and fishing out the keycard tied to the onboard account. I've got it covered. Her eyes widened as I walked over to the desk, grabbed her purse, and dumped it out onto the bed. I found her keycard and slipped it into my pocket. What are you doing? She demanded, her voice panicked. Canceling your access to my account, I said calmly. Since you're so independent these days, I figured you'd appreciate the chance to fend for yourself. Alan, you can't do this, she said, her voice trembling. Watch me. I logged into the onboard account on my phone, disabling her keycard and locking down every charge linked to my name. Then I booked a one-way flight home from the next port, ensuring I'd be off the ship and away from her by tomorrow afternoon. When I finished, I tossed her phone onto the bed. You've got about 12 hours to figure out how to pay for the rest of your stay. Good luck convincing Daniel to foot the bill. Her face went pale, and she lunged toward me, grabbing my arm. Alan, please! This isn't funny. You can't just leave me stranded here. I pulled away, my voice ice cold. Funny. I didn't think you could betray your husband on your honeymoon, but here we are. She started crying again, pleading with me to reconsider, but I was done. You wanted to play games, Allison, I said, opening the cabin door. Well, you just lost. Have fun with your brother. With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. Sitting in my tiny studio apartment weeks later, I thought about everything that had happened. The honeymoon, the betrayal, and the way I left Allison on that ship with nothing but her lies and regret to keep her company. Was it petty? Absolutely. Do I regret it? Not one bit. For the first time in years, I felt like I'd reclaimed a part of myself I didn't even realize I'd lost. The pain of her betrayal still lingered, but it no longer consumed me. I'd learned two things from all of this. Trust is precious, but it's not unconditional. It needs to be earned and protected, not exploited. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Revenge might not fix the hurt, but walking away with your dignity intact is the best closure you'll ever get. Now I'm focused on rebuilding my life. No more illusions, no more lies. Just me, a fresh start, and the promise that I'll never settle for anything less than honesty again.